guys, so we're on to our first ancient valley civilization, Mesopotamia. Get hype. Okay, so Mesopotamia. So we talked last time about the Neolithic Revolution. It's this idea of coming from a hunter-gatherer society to forming complex civilizations. So this discovery of farming during the Neolithic Revolution allowed those nomadic people to settle into those civilizations that we talked about. So that first civilization began in an area known as Mesopotamia. And I will want you all to know, the world's first civilizations all began in river valleys. Why? Well, if you have your city by a river, this is going to provide you resources. You can fish here, you can trade here, it becomes a great place of commerce. So all of these river valley civilizations are going to occur in these areas because it's the easiest for these people to help with building up their civilizations. So that first civilization, known as Mesopotamia, it's in between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in Iran and Iraq. And it's going to be known as the land between the rivers. It's often called the Fertile Crescent because this was an area where when people grew the crops were fertile, which meant they were good, they were plentiful, they gave them a lot of resources. And this area is also known as the cradle of civilization because this is where civilization begins. The first documented case of a civilization occurs in this area. And so you're now having this cradle. Everyone's flocking to this area and beginning this civilization. So this Tigris and Euphrates flooded once per year, and that would leave a lot of water to create more fertile soil, which makes the land more ideal for farming. So this first civilization developed in the Fertile Crescent and was known as Sumer. That was the first city. But the surrounding deserts and the lack of natural barriers attracted a lot of the outsiders to Mesopotamia, and it made the Sumerians vulnerable to attack. Because again, you don't have any barriers. There's not really any army. People haven't moved that far along because again, this is the first time you've ever had a civilization where people are working together and living in a community. So a lot of this area is going to be really prone to attack. So the first group you're going to want to know about is the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians are traders that colonized western parts of Mesopotamia, and they're going to be your first group you're going to want to know about. So in 715 BC, this Phoenician homeland is going to fall to Assyria, which we're going to talk about in a bit detail later on. In 750 BC, Phoenicians are going to create their own alphabet, which is going to be introduced to the Greeks. And again, we're going to spend a lot of time, guys, on the Greeks, so make sure to keep this in mind. So some of the lasting contributions of Mesopotamian society. They created these advanced cities. So these Sumerian city-states were protected by these high walls, something to try to make it a little bit more secure. But again, like I said, no armies to really help it. At the city center is this temple. It's going to be called a ziggurat. And this ziggurat is going to have the idea of high power, high authority, that people are going to look to as the leaders that will live there. You'll also have specialized workers. So again, like I said before, when you have workers, you're going to have a major class system. And in just about every society that we talk about in this class, you're going to have some sort of a class system. So in Mesopotamia, it starts at the top with priests and then kings, because one thing you're also going to see in these societies, religion plays a major part in how you organize your society. People look to religion for their answers for things because they don't have the internet. They don't have science to tell them otherwise. So religion is huge back in this time. So in the middle class, you're going to have skilled workers like merchants, people who can do odd jobs, maybe carpenters, people working in the economy, traders, artisans. And then at the bottom, you're going to have common farmers, people just working the land, and slaves. And again, slaves, as we've seen here, this is the first society. Slaves have existed since the beginning of time. And while it's not something to be proud of, it's a horrible part of history, it is something we need to learn about. So religion. Again, religion's a huge part of this. Sumerians and Babylonians, which are the two groups that make up Mesopotamia, were polytheistic. So just to remind yourselves, a lot of you might remember, what does polytheistic mean? So polytheistic, if you look at the word poly, it means many. So polytheistic people are people who worship multiple gods. versus monotheistic, which is when you worship one God. And we're going to be talking a lot about religion in this class, so you guys make sure you keep this word in mind. So as far as government goes, again, first time anyone's had a city-state, you've got to have someone to look to as your leader. So they had this Babylonian king named Hammurabi. And make sure you guys remember Hammurabi. He's going to create the first legal code, the first set of laws that's going to tell people how they should live their lives. So this Hammurabi's code had 282 laws, all based on justice and retaliation and how to live your life. It also started the idea of an eye for an eye. This idea of someone hurts you, someone pokes at your eye, you got to poke their eye back. It's an idea of justice and how you're going to live your life. So this code had different punishments for the various levels of society. Different things you did could lead to different punishments. You guys are going to be working a lot of activities in this class on Hammurabi's code. So here's an excerpt of Hammurabi's code. For instance, this first one. If a man has stolen an ox, a sheep, or a pig, or a boat that belonged to a temple or palace, he shall repay 30 times its cost. If it's belonged to a private citizen, he shall repay 10 times. If the thief cannot pay, he shall be put to death. So it's saying that if you steal something that belongs to someone, they have to repay, and if they don't, they have to accumulate interest. They have to pay even more, and if they still don't pay, you're put to death. So these ancient laws, people lived by these, and this was the only law code that they knew, so they followed these laws very strictly. And then you talk about writing. So the Sumerians made this world's first writing. It's this thing called cuneiform. We're all going to be practicing working on some cuneiform in this class. The Phoenicians who came later simplified cuneiform to this 22-letter alphabet. So we're starting to shape it a little bit closer to the English alphabet we see today. But language is an interesting thing. Language is going to take many forms. And when we look at cuneiform, cuneiform is like symbols. It's not letters. And it's really confusing when you try to read it. It's taken scholars thousands of years just to try to decipher it. But this was spread throughout the Mediterranean world, influenced things like English, or Greek, and Latin. This is an example of the cuneiform. So look at these symbols. This is really hard to make out, and it's really confusing. It must have taken people a long time just to figure out what was going on here. So we're going to actually be practicing with cuneiform in this class. I hope you guys get excited for it. And then lastly, you have technology. So during this time, you've got a city, people are talking and conversing, and they're figuring out different ways to have different farming skills, different ways of travel. And so they're going to invent things like the wheel, which again, there was no such thing as a wheelbarrow. You had to walk. You were doing your crops. You just have to do it by hand. Now you have a wheel. It can make you move a little bit faster. Sails. So now you can go and travel by ship. The plow. Huge thing for when you're farming your crops. And bronze metalwork, which can be helpful for both your army and for farming tools. So, that's all I got for you guys on the Mesopotamia. Hope you guys enjoyed this.